As if straight out of a dystopian novel or the video game cyberpunk, much of the West woke up today to a series of news articles that were reporting on how what looks like a simultaneous cyber attack across Lebanon and parts of Syria today, or it would have been Tuesday at time of reporting, which, as the AP reports, killed at least 8 people and injured some thousands more. The target, or at least the alleged target, would have been the organization known as Hezbollah, and yet this subject doesn't, instead of getting into the politics of this subject, I want to bring this subject up in regards to understanding what a pattern of life is and how a digital one is being built on and how we might be, or built on you, and how we might interrupt it. The term pattern of life is a specific term that is oftentimes used in military jargon to refer to what is the pattern of an individual's daily activities. You imagine it's sort of like a bigger picture perspective on an individual's routine. Now, say you want to look at a person or you want to capture them, it really would be an advantage to know what their daily schedule looks like. If you want to get into a novel form of this, with a little bit of hilarity, go read Around the World in 80 Days, and you will be introduced to one of the main characters, or the main character, who is hysterically known in the beginning of the novel for how ridiculously regular his schedule is. Everything is habitual and on time. So, in today's episode, we are actually going to be covering a large series of topics in a very short amount of time, because you might ask yourself the question of what is dystopia, cyberpunk, cell phones, pattern of life, and a Faraday bag, as well as an ontological argument for the existence of God that was written by Anselm in the 1000s AD. What do these things have in common? And before we get further into the episode, this episode is sponsored by Obsidian Arms, and Obsidian Arms was one of the first in, best dressed sponsor to address the intellectual side of gun culture. And while that may sound like a level of pretension coming from me, it is something of value to you that they have decided to continue to sponsor. So we thank them for that. Who is Obsidian Arms and what do they do? Well, they represent many of the facets of gun culture, many of the different elements that you might be interested in. In fact, if you go into your safe or your let's call it war room, you very likely might find something that was manufactured by them, even if it doesn't have their label on it. So if you are interested in the self-sufficiency that is gunsmithing and you understand the value of a good set of tools, you can go over to Obsidian Arms at obsidianarms.com and find their toolkits that are either general or specifically designed for certain sets, or you can look at some of their parts and equipment, some of which you'll be seeing featured on our Instagram in the coming days and weeks. Finally, if you are looking to bring something to the market that needs to be manufactured and you don't have a machine shop in your garage or your back door, I suggest that you give Obsidian Arms a call and bring your concept to life with them at obsidianarms.com. So, this introduction to the idea or to the current daily news might come across as a little rough. And quite frankly, I don't want to say that is so much by design, but it's an element of what it feels like to be on the frontier of this kind of technology. I would be remiss to both give into credentialism and say I'm not the most qualified person to address the subject, nor and that would be at the cost of what values that we can learn from a thing. It would also be a waste of your time to say that I am the best at it. But what we are dealing with and the angle that I want to make sure that I bring to the table has to do with how we look at technology and individual, let's call it sovereignty or individual liberty, individual responsibility when it comes to the development of technology going forward. Instead of getting into the weeds and the politics of Israel and Hezbollah and these different terrorist organizations, I want to look at how some of this technology has been and can be used against you. If you think of any device that you have that you can use to send messages back and forth to other people that get sent to you specifically, in order for that to work, that piece of technology has to have an ID. It has to have some sort of address. It needs to have some form of way of differentiating and discerning it from all the other devices, people, addresses, so on and so forth. It really is as simple as looking at your house. You have an address. It is a physical location. It is not where everybody else is. And there's a way that you use to differentiate that. And that is, again, your address. You have a cell phone number. You have all of these things that are used to identify. And if you put them all into a basket, let's take you and all your personal information, everything that you write down on, say, something like a driver's license form or a 4473 if you're buying a firearm, name, address, date of birth. These are all identifiers about yourself, but then you add on to that email address, phone number, blah, 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 blah. You can take any person, and what we oftentimes might see in a caricature of networking of men giving, business cards back and forth and talking about how cool one might be versus the other, blah, blah, blah. This ID can become a tool that is used against you. Imagine, per se, in its own humor, if the world's most wanted terrorist in 2008, Osama bin Laden, was also distributing flyers about his current location that pinged every 30 seconds to a minute. Well, that would be your phone. That would be a device like a phone that is capable of giving out a signal, and from that signal, it being triangulated. And what I mean by triangulated is, well, if it gives out a signal, there are ways to determine where it is. If it's not necessarily that it's not that a device itself has to have a GPS unit, but that does make it easier. What we're talking about is that your technology can be used through triangulation, and a triangulation is if you know where 2 points are and you know the distance and the azimuth from those 2 points that a third point is, you can triangulate. Where it is. You have 2 points on a map. You know that your third point is at so many degrees and so many yards, really just at so many degrees away from one point, and it's another set of degrees away from the other point where those two azimuth lines intersect is where your third point, your third object is. So if a cell phone is pinging off of two different towers, if two different towers in your area, not to be made into a Lord of the Rings reference, are both sending and receiving signal from a phone, and you can determine the azimuth of which is the direction that phone is from both of those towers, where that line those two lines intersect is where your phone is going to be. Or at least that's the idea in how triangulation works in a very, very rudimentary concept. So we're going back to the issue with what took place in Israel lately is it's what I would call a marked difference from how this kind of technology is typically used in counterterrorism. What you oftentimes see is that a device like a phone can be used to identify an individual's pattern of life by tracking its movements, and you can also figure out where a person is. So if let's say your phone gives off a signal, and we're going to use this as an example. It gives off a signal every 30 minutes, and that signal is a beacon, and if that beacon is triangulated every 30 minutes, it'll look like a series of dots on a map following where you move. So this is like the reverse of Pac-Man. Instead of gobbling up all the little white dots, you're leaving these breadcrumbs across where you go. So if your phone is being tracked deliberately by a product or by a person, and they're able to, let's say, ping your phone every 30 minutes, getting the location of your phone, Then what they can do is over time, maybe over the time of a week or a couple of days, they can look at what your pattern of life might be. They know that at Monday you get in your car at 8 a.m. and you drive to your place of work. You're at your place of work from 8:30 to 4:30 or whatever, but in between that you very oftentimes take a break and you go to these locations for lunch or you do something like that. And every day, Monday through Friday, is the same. You wake up they don't know when you wake up, but your phone starts moving at 7. It goes to the gym. It goes to the same gym. It leaves that gym. It goes back and it goes from there to your place of work. It stays at your place of work until noon. At noon, you usually go to one of 4 areas in a shopping area or something, or you stay at your desk, your cubicle, whatever. And then from there, you continue to stay at your job until 4 in the afternoon, get in your car, and then you go home, or you go on to whatever your activities are. And then if you remember growing up as a child, or you have children yourself, and you continue to have a weekly pattern, then if a phone can be tracked to your location, if it can be assigned to you and knowingly be assigned to you, if somebody knows what the address of your phone is, because outside of your phone number, remember, you can change phones without your phone number being changed. Each individual device has its own address. Now, for a while, people argued that that was a SIM card, but things kind of continue to change. And I don't want to be specific about a SIM card alone because we live in the 21st century. There is so much more. There are so many more devices, whether they're in our home or in our possession or that move around with us, that have those same kinds of addresses. So as the AP and other news sources are reporting, it might have been these things called pagers, which if you remember the 90s, these pagers that were being used as, well, small detonation devices. So while this may sound a little dry, and it does, and I understand that it sounds dry, I am trying to provide a cursory knowledge of how a phone or a piece of technology can be used to track your movements. It's not really good enough to say your phone is tracking you, right? If we hear this, whether through pundits or politicians or other people on the internet, that your phone is tracking you, it really would, I think this is one way where it might help to explain how it's tracking you. Your phone has an address. It has a specific address that differentiates it from all the others in the mess that is the internet, or the Internet of Things, as Jack Carr keeps referencing in his newest book, and some other ones. But what that does is it differentiates it, and if I can isolate that address and I can observe its activities, then I can build a pattern of life on it. And if I can use a computer to do that says, well, he's with this regularity at these locations at these times, blah, 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 it's easier to, let's say, target somebody when we know where they are. Now, targeting can come in a couple of forms. There can be the targeting of a marketing campaign, or there can be the targeting of a terrorist campaign, or a military campaign, whichever one you want to talk to. But targeting is still targeting, and both of them rely on the same principles. Pattern of life, what can a person be predicted to be wanting, desiring, or deciding to do, and how can we influence that or intercept that? And this goes into what we see in elements of science fiction, where that concept, the idea of your cell phone listening to you, or the idea of your technology being used to alter your decisions, is oftentimes extrapolated into nearly absurd degrees. And one of the forms of entertainment that does that is the video game Cyberpunk 2077, where you see people integrated with technology well beyond what might even look like the greatest fantasies of Elon Musk and Neuralink. But this isn't the first time that it's done. Again, we'll oftentimes refer to dystopian novels like 1984, where technology is used to spy on the individual, or movies like, what's the one with Christian Bale? Equilibrium, which was like a Matrix-y era movie that is probably going to be a little painful to watch every once in a while, but is still worth giving a a good look-see every once in a while. And the introduction and the illustration of this type of and the reference to this type of dystopian novels doesn't come in a void. Every once in a while, I hear this argument that, or every once in a while, you might hear something like, they never stopped to ask whether they should, only they continued moving on to see if they could. This is oftentimes in reference to science and technology. Again, arguments with AI and the development of this kind of technology has come up time and time again about how when somebody is developing something that could be very dangerous. Imagine being on the Manhattan Project, which was illustrated in last year's movie Oppenheimer, or imagine being involved in some form of technological revolution development of something that you know is going to change the world, but you also know it's a one-way street. You cannot, once you go down the road, you cannot reverse course. And or at least you believe that. Let's say that you believe that with enough certainty. I think there's a problem here in the way that the arguments are phrased, especially when it comes to the development of such things. The problem with the way that we look at dystopia is that the further we become technologically integrated, the more likely or guaranteed, at least it looks like, it's going to be. Or at least if we continue down, if we I want to argue against that. That would be the case only if we comply and function in the exact same way that we are functioning today. If I maintain my pattern of life exactly as I do, with the habits that I have and the activities that I take place in, and I know that those things are going to be manipulated by a form of technology, and I refuse to have any understanding of what that technology can do to me, if I am going to be controlled by the algorithm of social media instead of participate in it as an agent, as somebody acting, then I really can't claim some sort of moral high ground for being taken advantage of by it. Really, or even if I could, what good would that do me? What value would that have for someone in my position to, say, express that I feel like I'm a victim from certain forms of technology? And I want to go into an explanation on how this carries on moving forward, particularly using Anselm's ontological argument, which comes from about 1000-ish AD. He was alive from our early 1000, and he passed on. Let's see if I can even have the calendar dates on. He was who held the office of Archbishop of Canterbury from 1093 to 1109. So, as Wikipedia refers to Anselm, this is Anselm of Canterbury. He was, a Benedictine monk, abbot, philosopher, and theologian of the Catholic Church who held an office of Archbishop of Canterbury from 1093 to 1109. Anselm is theologically and philosophically known for creating a series of arguments, or maybe more better said, popularizing or utilizing, writing down, and presenting a series of arguments for the existence of God. And one of them, which an old professor of mine referred to as the least satisfying but one of the longest lasting, is the ontological argument for the existence of God. Now, it is an argument itself that isn't very satisfying, but I think it comes to play here in the way that we're looking at this form of technology. I understand that I'm taking a different approach, or I'm bringing on a different way that you might look at this kind of technology and the technology of the future, but ultimately I believe that the worldview that you have, Holt, regarding these subjects will have a longer lasting and more, let's not use the word profound, but consequential impact on your future than whether or not, you have a certain widget, or you're afraid or not afraid of certain forms of technology. So the ontological argument for the existence of God goes something like this. The actuality of a thing is greater than the idea of a thing. And the idea of God, so that would mean if a man can conceive of the idea of a thing, The real thing is greater than the idea. It is more true to what it is than the idea, because mankind can't observe things objectively. Now, this is, again, an extremely simplified version of it. So if there is a conceptual truth, or let's see, there is a conceptual truth, or there's something that is true by definition, that God is a being which is greater than the imagination of what he is. That means therefore, if mankind can conceive of the idea of a God, there must be the existence of a God, and that existence of a God must be greater than the idea of a thing. Maybe put another way, it is a conceptual. This is notes from what would it be? The Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which includes this section. It is a conceptual truth that God is a being than which none greater can be imagined, and God exists as an idea in the mind, which leads to point 3, a being that exists as an idea in the mind and in reality is, other things being equal, greater than a being that exists only as an idea in the mind. And by definition, God is the greatest of all possible things. Therefore, he must be greater than the idea. And if he must be greater than the idea, and the idea exists, then he must exist as well. It's sort of like, put even in a more simplified way, if the idea of God can be thought of, if the idea of God can be conceived, therefore he must exist, because the definition of God is something greater than his mere conception. If we can think about the idea of a God existing, then there must be something that is God. And this applies to the realm of technology. And not to mistake technology itself, be the big T of tech, to itself be God. But that if mankind can conceive of something within the realm of technology, specifically in the realm of control, something like 1984's technological control of the population, or mankind's willingness to manipulate words and writing, actually having a or a foundational element in regards to technology itself, then it can become true. If we can perceive something like a dystopian future, then it is possible. Or if we can conceive of technology, something like artificial intelligence becoming so advanced that many people cannot distinguish it from reality, if we can conceive this idea as being true because it's within the realm of our reach, then it is very likely, if not possible, in fact it is probable, that it will come to pass. So, if you can imagine somebody using your phone to manipulate you through building a pattern of life on you and then using that technology to identify different factors and features about you, then it's safe to assume that somebody might do that in the future. And something to maybe even more illustrate that problem is that, in the simplest of forms, people without moral scruples may blunder may blunder forward, trying to create something unconcerned about whether or not it is right or wrong, or more specifically, some people don't have the moral fiber not to do tyrannical activity. So, what does that mean? What does that mean going forward? We may complain about technology becoming more and more invasive in our lives, but we cannot really rely on other people we cannot rely on maybe technological companies to self-regulate in that capacity, only to a certain extent, and it's not universal. The universal critique cannot be leveled and levied only at specific companies. So if we were looking at the realm of technology as a whole, it might be the case that company A produces product A and company B produces product B, but corporation C or government D decide to use those two different pieces of technology which were created in isolation, fuse them together and use them to do the tyranny. So that means that if we can conceive that this is possible, it is very likely that it will come to pass, which again refers to that ontological argument. And that means that it is sort of an argument that you cannot bury your head in the sand and get away with it. So maybe it's time to look into those Faraday bags, which are not that expensive, which we're going to have to follow on with another episode in the near future. So, what is the great takeaway? Technology is going to continue to become more and more invasive. It can be used in new ways, possibly turning your cell phone battery into an explosive against you. That means, although I may not have all the answers regarding technological counter-surveillance, it is a path that we are going to be able to go down together. And if this has been helpful for you, if it has given you a way to think about technology in regards to something more worldview-based, well then, I hope it has been beneficial. Leave a comment down below if you're on YouTube, or if you want to follow us on Instagram, you can find us there at Redacted LLC. Also, you can find our shop at redactedllc.com. But this has been the Redacted Culture Cast. Now go forth and conquer.
I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their